Well, I hope this is going to be working. Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. So, inshallah, today we're actually doing the Fiqh of Worship and lots of things to say. Excited to, inshallah, talk about a couple things in relationship to Imama. So let's look at what we talked about last time, right? Let's see right there. We talked about women attending the masajid. Well, that was the time before that one. But we talked about some things about being the imam, the importance of it, and what is the reward that they would get. And we went in some details with that one. We also talked about who really precedes, like who's the one that's supposed to be the imam, who gets the priority to be the imam. And we talked about the person that memorized the Quran. We also talked about the person that is knowledgeable in fiqh. And then we talked about having knowledge in sunnah. And we said that that's basically equivalent to saying in fiqh. So we went in details with that one. Then we talked about respecting old age. If somebody is an older person, respecting the elderly, respecting experience, and that being basically part of Islam to recognize the different things that really value the most. So when we look at imama, which is right there, we're talking about imamate. I guess this is the word that they used. Okay. Speaking about imama and imamate, all of that, just recognizing that the whole issue of giving honor to this position really comes from considering that a leader is a person that really recognizes, one, their Quran, two, their sunnah slash fiqh, three, recognizes the elderly, recognizes the experience, and then of course all the other things would basically go in, basically come in as well, such as a person being in power, or a person being at least the hired imam, so giving them that priority because they're the hired imam, right? And going in details with that one. But of course we didn't actually do this one, which is من لا تصح إمامته في الصلاة. So who's the one that their imamate is basically, we said invalid, and then we had different wordings that we asked you to search for to give me perhaps the best word that we could use to those that their leadership in Salah would be either invalid or, let's just say, not the preferred leadership. Let's just say it that way, right? Let's look at it. So why is that the case? So imama is actually a big responsibility, and therefore there are supposed to be certain qualifications for the imam to be in that position, and that they have to actually be, let's say, at least the ones to be qualified and be the ones to really hold such qualifications in order to be in that position. And what the most important thing when we're speaking about that position is that that position holds more than just leading in prayer, because that position is also going to mean that that person is being a role model. That person is leading them in prayer, the meanings of prayer and what that prayer holds, and therefore they're taking those words in that position as an inspiration. Okay, so it's not just that position is just, somehow standing there just because, someone's going to be standing there, but no, this position is a position of inspiration. This position is a position to lead the group into Jannah as well. So they really have to live it. They really have to represent it and really understand what this position entails and what it carries. So that's why the first qualification is basically that a person that is fasiq. Here's this one. He said, فَلَا يَجُوزُ أَن يُوَلَّ الْفَاسِقُ إِمَامَةَ الصَّلَاةِ. So here it is. When we speak about somebody that is fasiq, I mean, here he used the words somebody that is a disobedient person. Well, I mean, maybe that translation is not, I would say, is not fully giving me the meaning of fasiq. Let me explain the words fasiq. So the word fasiqa, originally, it actually means to remove the peel off the fruit. And what does that actually mean? If you remove the peel off the fruit, you basically make it rot faster. It basically gets exposed to air, exposed to the different things that are in the air, and then it starts turning colors, and then it rots faster. And certainly that peel was supposed to be a protector. Okay, that peel was supposed to be a protector, giving it a longer life, longevity, all those different things. But here's one thing. How is that related to people? Are we removing a peel? Like, we're not going to be peeling their skin off, but no. That's basically equivalent to taqwa. Okay, taqwa is supposed to be that shield. What is taqwa really entailing? Taqwa is entailing that the person has this protection that is protecting them from rotting mentally, spiritually, and in their heart, and even physically. So, what is this shield? This shield is taqwa. This shield is the amount of piety that they basically would hold, the amount of piety that they would embrace. So the second that they would remove this shield, that's that second that they had exposed themselves to rotting faster and basically getting into the contaminants, getting into that person's heart, that person's mind, that person's body, and that person's social life, etc. And then if that person is a fasiq, meaning what? Meaning that person is determined and is consistent in not being, let's say, connected in embracing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principles. That's what a fasiq is. I know you can say, well, that's a disobedient person. So you just basically just described a disobedient person. So yes, I did, but at the same time, the word disobedient, it just more relates to just like a law type of thing. But the word fasiq has a spiritual connotation that relates to let's call it a practical relationship. So that's why in Lugha Arabiya, it has these secrets in it. It goes beyond the load that it carries. It carries a load that contains meanings, a load that contains, let's say, the hidden side of it. It's basically, when you look at a fruit, you would say one word, but then this fruit would contain a taste, it would contain a core, it would contain a seed. It contains more than just the appearance, the outer appearance. Okay. And that's the same thing when you're talking about Lugha Arabiya, that it carries more than just that word that relates to the practical side, because it contains the word fasiq, contains a meaning that relates to the spiritual side as well. And that's why I like using the word fasiq than actually use the word disobedient. The word disobedient makes it that you're just talking about a person that is not committed to the practical piece of it. At least that's the connotation that I would get. Okay, maybe you could tell me a different word in English that might be more equivalent to the word fasiq. Well, I'm not an expert in English language, so do tell me if there's an equivalent word in English. Okay, so when you look at a person that is fasiq, if this person, I mean, are we really going to be judging people? Let's say this person wanted to come in for salah, okay? And then we had a number of different people that were known to being pious, etc. If this person is not pious, is not a practicing person, are we really going to be telling this person, sorry, but you actually have a history of being a person of sin. We would like you to step back. Well, no, you're not going to do that because that's unmasking the person. You want to, if there is this person and, probably putting them in that position of being an imam for that prayer, for example, and that was going to maybe encourage them to be in a better person, then that would be permissible for that time. But the person that holds a history of having a good determination in being committed to the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of respect, definitely we're going to leave them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to judge them. But from what we know about that person is that they're people of faith, they're people of determination on the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then in that situation, we would take in consideration these things and actually put them in that position. And this is extremely important because the imama is more than just a position of, let's say, practical leadership, but it's actually a position of inspiration. Okay, but here's the thing. When you say a fasiq, what really are you entailing? Are you entailing something that is more of, an action type of thing, a practical type of thing? This person is committing certain practices, like a person probably maybe a disobedient person committing zina, probably stealing, maybe drinking, or what are we really talking about? Are we talking about somebody that has a different type of fisq? In other words, they're practicing or at least believing in something that is, let's say, an innovation, or somebody that has an issue with their aqidah. And what does that really entail? Okay, now one thing is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, had taught us not to judge people based on some rumors going out there. We want to make sure that this isn't just a rumor, but this is something that is really dependent on evidence. So what are we going to do? We're going to search that imam's background and say, well, let's search their background. Let's open up their social media. Let's open up this. Can you open up your accounts? We need to, just investigate. No, your duty is not to investigate people's sin. But if this sin had become so shared by many people that it became so known because this person is sharing it publicly, then that becomes a different thing. This becomes a different thing that possibly in a polite way ask to have someone that fits that position. So when we're speaking about perhaps in the masjid, certainly we need to, especially if we're taking consideration a person that is holding a position in the masjid as an imam, then we're definitely going to take that seriously, and we're going to possibly even do a background search, because we want to make sure that this person doesn't have a history of probably engaging in different misconducts, or maybe wrong behavior in their religion, or maybe even wrong belief in their practices. Progressive Islam were probably known to speaking about, in holding wrong fatwas, and in speaking about a different type of Islam or law away from the Quran and Sunnah. Then in that situation, we're going to take that in consideration. And yes, certainly, we're going to be judgmental. You're going to be judgmental. Isn't that against Islam and not part of Islam? Oh, yes, it is part of Islam. We're going to be judgmental because we are supposed to be taking in consideration that this position is a position of inspiration, and therefore it is farther than just an individual. This isn't judging an individual just as an individual. No, you chose a public position. You chose to be a public figure. You chose to be in public. Therefore, we're going to hold that in consideration. And then we would have the right to judge whether you are qualified for this public position or not. Keep that one in mind. So therefore, if you're going to be holding a public position, yes, we're going to do a background check. We're going to see, whatever is out there, a mugshot, or probably, maybe even do a history and check and see, can we have your previous addresses for probably, I don't know, the 5 previous addresses, to see if you had any kind of maybe a history of maybe violence, or a history of probably sexual misconduct, or any of that sort. Yes, we need your previous addresses, and we need to do that research to see. And yes, we would like to get your social security number in order to also do, not of course that their social security number would be public, but it would basically be something that the HR in the masjid would basically run a screening for that person to make sure that they don't have a history of wrong behavior, just like in any other institution. In any other institution, they would basically ask to, especially if we're talking about certain institutions, they will do a background check. If you were to rent a home, they'll do a background check. If renting a home is going to mean that they're going to do a background check, why shouldn't we do a background check on the imams? Can we actually lay off an imam because of, let's say, a misconduct? Or should we not judge them? Yes, we can lay off an imam because of a misconduct. Why? Because al-fasiq is not permitted to be an imam. If this person is a fasiq, then in that situation, we would not put them as an imam. Okay, can we expand the imama to actually say things like be in a position of al-imama? In other words, like an inspiration, a religious inspiration. Like, for example, a person known to having a history. We had multiple complaints of girls actually complaining this person having inappropriate behavior with women, for example. Okay, we had a number of different people actually contact us and tell us this person is engaging in such speech or attempting to basically have, let's say, misconduct and such and such. Well, in that situation, we would definitely, if we have evidence to prove that, then even if we're speaking about positions of inspiration, if this becomes a public known information, this is a fasiq, then we would have to not encourage other people getting inspired by the wrong thing. So then we would have to, let's say, weigh the situation before we make a final judgment. At the same time, if the person is in that position, but we're taking in consideration the behavior that they're engaging in, and we're putting in a set of regulations to make sure that this person does not engage in this misconduct. Let's say, for example, we have somebody that has a history of bringing in a lot of the youth within the masjid. They manage to be very great influencers on the younger generation, and they have the skill. They do a great job. So instead of probably laying them off completely, if he has let's say, that weakness in dealing with younger women, what about younger boys? Do they have that as well? Why am I even speaking about that? So here's the thing. When somebody has a history of misconduct, we can't just say, yes, they made tawbah, that's enough, you just got to accept it. No, 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 no. We can't just say they made tawbah and that's it, we're going to accept it. If that person has a history where they were basically weak in, let's say, dealing with younger women, then in that situation, their tawbah is between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As a masjid organizer and a masjid manager, and basically a person that is within the HR, I have to make sure that the position this person is in has a person that is qualified, which basically means does not show and have a past and a history of showing weakness in that area. So if their weakness is, let's say, younger women, they were 13-year-old girls and etc., then can I basically say we don't want him working with younger women, but we'll make him work basically with younger boys, and making sure that we have good supervision to oversee that this relationship with the boys is basically going into the right direction. Can we do that? So can we use a type of regulations to make sure that their fisq is not going off board, even though they had made tawbah? So we cannot be what we call in Bilad al-Sham, we call them darwasha, dervish. Where's that coming from? It's basically coming from those that basically relate to, let's say, a very spiritual thing, but then what happens in the area, in the corner of fasiqeen, and how they play the game and how they manage to scam is not known to the people that basically were always used to being in the corners of the masjid. Okay, the ones that were always in the corners of the masjid, they're not familiar with the scamming techniques and the scamming methods, and then they end up being easily scammed, and these people will manage to basically get around and sneak in, getting access to possibly the different behaviors. And you want to keep in mind, the worst of the scammers are the ones that hide behind religion. Those are the worst scammers. They hide behind religion. They give you a religious impression, and then you end up discovering that these people are really nothing but a snake underneath a very beautiful appearance and beautiful colors. So you want to be really careful. So what does that mean? Well, that means we have to be aware and certainly protecting the faith and the ird, and also the mindset of our masjid is and the position of the imam is basically something that is part of our deen. It's not somehow being judgmental in for something in a person that is individual and just a random individual. But no, if this person is going to be an imam, we're definitely going to take this position seriously and make sure that the people that take this position are actually qualified to be in that position and not abuse a religious position or abuse a religious appearance in order to get access to people. Because most people, they would see the imam as, especially women, they would see the imam as a person that is that is almost infallible, that they're religious people, yes, and yeah, he's got a beard. And the women, unfortunately, would come in and actually talk to the imam like she's talking to her brother, and actually talk about her personal life and share information about her personal life, and talk to this imam about her, her period, and talk to him about her life and relationship with her husband, and share things that are so personal. I mean, really personal. And yes, as far as your brain can go with speaking about personal, yes, women share these with the imams, thinking that I'm actually here, la haya'a fi din. And that's the word that they would use, that there's no shyness in religion. Shyness is the core of religion. Even if you wanted to ask for a fatwa, go to a shaykha if it's related to something that is personal, especially. Don't, and even with a shaykha, you have to do your research to know which information to share. Certain bedroom information is to be within that privacy area. Believe it or not, they'll actually share it and go in details. It's like, can you be specific? Can you be anonymous? Be as anonymous as can be to preserve your privacy, to preserve your husband's privacy, to preserve your home, to preserve your honor. Definitely call from an anonymous number. Hey, it's so easy. Go to settings, get yourself anonymous. If this person is familiar with your voice, call the imam of another masjid that is not familiar with your voice, doesn't know who you are, and ask the question in a specific way without going into stories. And if you could research, go to Islam Q&A, go to Islam Way, go to these websites if you could research to do. But if you are not capable of researching on your own, or you basically got lost, and if you're capable of sending a note, possibly a note that that reaches the imam and he could probably answer it without knowing who that sender is, then that's even better. Stay as anonymous as possible. Preserve your honor. And it's really sad that many times, those stories about those imams basically going overboard with women. I'm not at all justifying, but I'm saying they went overboard because many women are getting too close. They're getting too close because they don't know how to protect themselves. I'm not saying that the victim is going to be the oppressor and the abuser now. I'm just saying, ladies, you need to learn how to protect yourselves, even from those that are, abusers, or perhaps people that may be holding a religious position, and then you getting too close and then finding yourself, hey, this imam that done this to me, or he told me this, and etc. Well, maybe how did he get access to having this free space of you and him talking alone? How did you end up being alone in his office? How did that even happen? Where and when? Why did you actually go to the masjid and go to his office? Oh, it's a public place. Why did you go to his office when he was alone? Did you know that that was haram for you to be alone with any man that is not your mahram? Why were you alone? I wanted to ask a question. Maybe you should have gotten someone else with you, and probably that way you would protected yourself. But he's the imam. He should be respecting his, but you're right. He should be respecting his position, but you should also learn how to protect your position as well. These predators, they could be hiding in so many different, under so many different garments. So I'm not here saying that the imams are, dangerous people. I know that there is this attempt to make imams appear like they are predators hiding under the garment of faith, etc. No, absolutely not. That's not my attempt whatsoever. Imams are the beacons within our society. I hope they live it. I hope they demonstrate it. I hope they keep it that way. And as a society, we have to make sure that we put in the regulations and the restrictions to assure and make sure that the ones that sit on that chair are and stand on that carpet and lead are the ones that really deserve to be the inspiration. We've got, in other words, public duty, and we also have a personal, individual duty that you have to do, which is making sure that you understand this imam is not your mahram, and therefore you have to protect yourself, even if the masjid board was supposed to do their job in making sure that the attendees at the masjid are basically protected. But you have to protect yourself from any non-mahram. And yes, this imam should be living that inspiration, but they have their shortcomings. So therefore, you as an individual, you have to know how to approach, whether it's a doctor or whether it's an imam or whether it's a random person on the street. You have to know how to approach these people the right way. Okay, so let's see, what other things that we are, if somebody wants to say something, I know some people have, you can unmute yourselves. I know some people have something to say and they want to comment on what I'm saying. So you can go ahead and say, I know some people have something to say because they heard a lot of things. If you want to unmute yourself, go ahead. No one wants to say anything? Okay, they want to keep it private. Okay, that's okay. Let's see. The Prophet ﷺ basically said, لا تؤمن امرأة رجلا ولا يؤم أعرابي مهاجرا ولا يؤم فاجر مؤمنا إلا أن يقهره الله بسلطان يخاف سيفه وصوته. What does that mean? So the Prophet ﷺ said, so now we're going into the other people that cannot lead. So we have this hadith that says, no woman should lead a man in prayer. Pretty straightforward. No, nor should a Bedouin lead an immigrant to Medina. What? We'll talk about it. Nor should a wicked man lead a believer in prayer except when he overpowers him with his authority, so that the believer is afraid of his sword and whip. Is afraid of his power. Okay. I think the English translation is really ambiguous. Let's actually go in details and know how to be and explain it. No woman should lead a man in prayer. That's pretty straightforward. That's pretty straightforward. You can't be straightforward as that. Okay. So a woman should not be leading a man in prayer, whether we're speaking about obligatory prayers or whether non-obligatory prayers. What if she memorized a lot more than him? Yes, she still can't lead the prayer. But what if it's her own husband? She can't lead the prayer as well. And that was unanimously agreed upon, by the way. Okay. But there are these very rare, and they're considered as al-aqwal al-shadh. What is al-qawl al-shadh? Al-qawl al-shadh entails two things. First of all, the word shadh actually means, what is the word shadh? Extraordinary? No. Something that is different, something that stands out. Okay. And it can also mean an aberration. Pay attention to this one. When you say qawl shadh, you're actually talking about a fatwa that was not accepted or endorsed by other scholars because it lacks the evidence. Keep this one in mind. So two things. One, it lacks evidence. Two, the scholars that reviewed this fatwa did not endorse it. Three, it became more of an aberration. In other words, it's not accepted. It's basically something that was said and certainly seen and ruled by scholars that it is shadh to mean something that is erroneous. Keep this one in mind. Now, just because a certain fatwa is found in a book of fiqh, which can be a qawl shadh, which can be something that one scholar had said, but then all the other scholars basically had disregarded it and basically considered it as something that is shadh, something that stands out as not acceptable, erroneous, that is not standing on strong evidence. Then in that situation, we cannot use that qawl that is shadh and say, well, we've got an evidence right there, Ibn al-Athir, or perhaps maybe Ithawri, and one scholar in there probably said something, and then say, yes, then that means here's my evidence. The scholar's wording on its own is not evidence. Keep this one in mind. This is really important. Just because a scholar said something, there's no papacy in Islam. Just because a scholar said something, that doesn't stand up as evidence. Okay, what makes it something that stands on evidence is basically the evidence that it is based on. The resources back it up, or the resources basically make it fall, make it collapse. That just because a scholar said something, it doesn't make it as evidence. Okay, so some people would say, well, there's this Amina Wadud basically led these guys in the masjid, and when she led them in the masjid, of course, the feminist Muslims right there then were so proud of it. And certainly the West, it's like, hey, we're actually bringing in, finally, the women, the Muslim women are right now, due to the Western empowerment of women, now women can lead men in prayer. And of course, there were only 70 people, probably the cameraman and the other guy and all of that. But then, of course, it was considered an achievement. Okay, they considered it as an achievement. And then, of course, CNN is there and all the media is there to basically make a scene out of this event. Make a scene out of this event. And then, unfortunately, you had other scholars, certainly, they came up and said, well, I wouldn't necessarily stand against it if it's not the obligatory prayer, because al-Badri had said this and this, or Ibn al-Athir had said this and this. Okay, we're going to say, wait a minute, even if it's said by a scholar, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's something that we would take as evidence unless it is supported by evidence. Why? Because because everybody, we would take their words and reject it, except the one that resides in this grave, that is the Prophet. Just because a scholar said something doesn't necessarily make it as this is an evidential thing. We would consider something to have evidence and stand on evidence if it basically stands on Quran and Sunnah. That's how we would know that something is to be part of Islam and something is not. Okay, so just because there is a qawl for al-Tabari or a Thawri or Abu Thawr that said this and this, that's not an evidence. Is it in, yeah, I've got a reference, and that's not an evidence. Yes, they said that, but that's qawl shadh. It doesn't stand on evidence, nor is it after scrutiny, nor is it endorsed by other scholars. Then therefore, we also would see a text like this, لا تؤمن امرأة رجلا. A woman does not lead a man in prayer. Is that a reflection of Islam seeing women as inferior? No. because the position of imama, to be a person in leadership, is not only a position to lead the prayer, but it's not necessarily tashrif, it's not necessarily a place of honor, but it's also taklif. And plus, العبادات توقيفية. العبادات توقيفية. What does that mean? العبادة itself, all the different things that relate to ibadah, that relate to worship, you would consider that it's part of Islam. Let me write the word. توقيفية. Let me write the word. This is a very important word. Am I writing in English or in Arabic? Okay, here we go. Let's write that one. توقيفية. What does that mean? So توقيفية actually means that we would not consider something as part of Islam unless we basically have the evidence to prove that it is part of Islam. In other words, the resource that we would consider that this is part of Islam is basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. توقيفية. It has to trace back all the way to the Kitab and Sunnah. Simple. توقيفية. Now, any other type of ibadah, okay, any other type of ibadah, or sorry, not ibadah, but any other type, we would basically say halal unless proven otherwise. But in ibadah, we would say do not do unless you have the evidence that it was done by the Prophet. The other thing, let's just say somebody says, well, this hadith is basically not necessarily authentic. We're going to say, fair enough, okay. Even though we would know that historically, number two, there are the sunnah fi'liya and sunnah tarkiya. What's the difference? Sunnah fi'liya is something that the Prophet ﷺ had done. Sunnah tarkiya, something that the Prophet ﷺ had the opportunity, quote unquote, okay, to do it, but did not do it. Like what? Like, for example, were there enough women to ask them to stand up and actually do the adhan? Yes. Did he ever do that? No, he didn't. Then therefore, the practice is that the Prophet ﷺ avoided that when it was possible and available for him to do it. Then that would actually mean, by that inference, that that's basically what the Prophet ﷺ does not approve of. He never put a woman to lead the men in prayer? Yes, never. Okay. He never put a woman to make the adhan? Yes, never. He never put a woman to basically stand in front of all the men and read Quran in front of them with a beautiful voice? Yes, never did that. Okay. He never had a woman basically lead or even participate in jihad? Yes, he never had that. Even though some women, trust me, they were stronger than you and I. Yes, but he never did that. That means that's the inference, that's what he would approve or not approve of. And it was not culture-based. It was basically him teaching us that this is what the religion approves of or what the religion does not approve. So keep that one in mind, that there is the inference. If that was not done, then the inference would be that this would not be approved of. Okay, let's see. لا تؤمن امرأة رجلا ولا يؤم أعرابي مهاجرا. And no Arabi. By the way, I used to teach at the Swedish Theological Institute. Okay, and in this institute, it was really there were Christian missionaries. Okay, and they were, well, basically I was hired to teach Islam. Okay, and certainly they were teaching Islamic faith basically to learn how to basically get into the Muslim society. I know that what their job was, but alhamdulillah, that was probably one of the most successful positions that I actually held, to be honest. I had a number of different people from that seminary actually get influenced and wanted to change and changed their position from wanting to learn Christianity to wanting to learn Islam. I didn't keep, of course, my relationship with them later on, the students were men and women. Okay. Men and women, and certainly I'm not going to keep a relationship with men and women, even though I was considered a teacher. But anyhow, I was asked by them, why can't a woman be the imam? But of course, I'm not going to answer the answer in using, well, the Quran says and the Hadith says and all of that, and give them a lesson like that, like I just did right now. So I explained it to them. I had my brother with me. I didn't used to go alone. I had my brother with me. And I asked him, I said, Umar, I want you to stand in front of them. And I want you to demonstrate how we pray right in front of them. So he demonstrated it. And then I said, the question for the guys here, if you had a woman praying in front of you like that, which one of you is going to be capable of focusing on their prayer and on their spirituality? They all started laughing and said it's impossible for us to focus on our prayer if we had a woman basically pray in front of us with these movements. It was impossible. I said, thank you. That's why women stayed in the back. Because for us, the men and their movement is not something that is of a fitna, like the women's movement is a fitna to the men. All right. Just to note that one, just on a side. Okay. ولا يؤم أعرابي مهاجرة. What is an Arabi? Is an Arabi different than Arabi? Yes. So is this talking about Arabi should not be the Imam over a Muhajir? No, not Arabi. So a person that's Arabi, who's Arabi anyways? Arabi is a person that their mother tongue is Arabi. Okay, that's Arabi. Okay, if a person's mother tongue is Arabi, then you're Arabi. If your mother tongue is not Arabi, then you're not Arabi. Even though you're probably maybe Saudi, Palestinian, Syrian, if your mother tongue is not Arabi, you just lost your Arabiyyat. Okay? Yes, maybe your ancestry is Arabi, but then you did not actually stand to be Arabi. Okay? Now, that's one thing. According to a number of different scholars, al-Arabi is a person that speaks Arabi. So al-Arabi is basically attributed to the language and not to an ancestry or a race. Right now, during our times, Arabism is attributed to a race or a specific nationality. Okay, but that's not actually accurate, because you had Akrad Kurds that live in Syria that don't necessarily speak Arabic. Just because they hold the Syrian passport doesn't make them Arab. They'll tell you we're not Arab. And same thing, if you're talking about Turkmeni, same thing, they're living in Jordan, they'll tell you we're not Arab. That's okay. They're not Arab. They are Turkmeni. They are Ashuri. They are Kurdish, or they are, just different things, even though they live in an Arabic country. Okay, so just to let you can just be aware of the difference. Okay, so an Arabi is basically the person that speaks Arabi, but they're living a nomad life. What do? They're Bedouin life. They would basically live in one place, and then once the resources, they're done with the natural resources in that area, they'll carry their belongings and basically go for another place that has the resources that they depend on, whether food, meaning grass and all of the greenery, and water. So they don't make resources, but they dig for the resources. They search, and their movement within the area is all dependent on search and their continuous search for resources. They don't make resources. Al-Arab, they will make resources. Al-Arab will not make resources. They will search for the resources of living. Okay, the Bedouins. We still have Bedouins in our society, by the way. In the Arabic society, we still have Bedouins. And they still like to live that lifestyle. And they still have their, depends on which area you're talking about. They will have their accent. They will have their lifestyle. I'll tell you a story I'll never forget. So I had a Bedouin woman. I was visiting this Bedouin group that was next to our old ranch when I was a young girl. Anyhow, so I was 19 years old at the time. Okay. And the mother, the woman, basically, she sees me and she's like, hey, I'm going to ask for, she was talking to my mother and she said, I'm asking for your daughter's hand in marriage, talking about me. And my mom was, trying to explain to her that our lifestyle is different. We can't live their lifestyle. And she said, listen, my son is searching for a second wife. She would be a second wife, and we'll build her a tent right at that hill up there. And we'll give her 60 heads of sheep to basically milk and do butter and, do all that right up there. And then my mother tried to explain to her, she's still going to school. And she said, listen, we'll basically make sure that she continues her education. After all, she said, that her father made it part of the marriage contract that she would continue her education. So I was confused. I said, you continued your education? She said, yeah. I said, and how far along did you go? And she said, I learned how to count until 30. Okay. She learned how to count until 30. So, this is an idea just about their lifestyle. Just imagine no resources. That's the only resource that you're going to get. Probably a couple heads of sheep. Okay. And the water, you're going to go to the well and actually get the water from the well. Okay. In order to wash, clean, cook, whatever it is, you're basically going to use a bucket. Okay. Electricity, no, don't even have access to electricity. You're going to be basically using fire, and that's what you're going to be using. Sometimes we'll probably get you some electricity using cars on batteries, but that's basically it. And yeah, I don't know how, but they managed to get a dish to watch TV. But even watching TV is not going to be something that you would be doing, because you basically are going to be having a lot of milking your goats, your sheep, and definitely hygiene. You're going to throw that out of the window. There's no hygiene. That's barely something that you're going to be thinking of, because the smell is definitely going to be the smell of animal droppings basically all around you. So yeah, just imagine. Yeah. So those are basically Arab. Okay. Al-Arab, they live differently, and you could say that لا يؤم أعرابي مهاجرا. Why did the Prophet ﷺ actually say that these Bedouins, that they would not lead over a muhajir? A muhajir is somebody that immigrated from Mecca to Medina. So why did he actually say that they cannot lead? Because they don't have ilm. There's no education. If there's no education, then there's no fiqh. Then they're not going to know the proper way to lead in prayer. Then the inspiration definitely is going to go out the window. These people usually don't have fiqh, usually don't have knowledge, don't usually have the proper etiquette. They'll be very, very spontaneous without you realizing. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ was basically telling us that there are certain considerations to basically take in mind when we would hire a person as an imam, that certainly we may need maybe an imam to know the English language. Why? Because the attendees mainly speak English, for example, or speak Farsi or whatever language. We need to make sure that this imam is capable of giving the right service. What service? the service in leading in prayer, the service possibly in educating, the service in possibly counseling, the service in possibly inspiring people. So those positions, it depends on the position of what, because there can be an imam just to lead the prayer, and they basically need the qualification of memorizing the Quran. But another one is probably holding a position of a scholarly position. And the third one is probably holding a position of a counseling position. Each one is going to require different kinds of qualifications to make sure that this person is basically doing the services that the masjid is basically supposed to be providing, or the imamat is providing. Okay, so right now, certainly our life became more sophisticated, but just as in this hadith, لا يؤم أعرابي مهاجرا, that's for us to see that certainly there are certain qualifications that are to be considered, whether we're speaking about education or etiquette or etc., that certainly we can eliminate an imam even though they may have the ilm. They may have the ilm, but they may not have the other skills necessary for that position. Okay, let's say وَلَا يَؤُمُّ فَاجِرٌ مُؤْمِنًا, and no fajr, no person that basically is consistently not living faith, not being consistent in their faith, they should not be leading a person that is consistent with the faith. In other words, we're looking at one, yes, we're looking at gender. Two, we're looking at education possibly. And three, we're also looking at, let's say, religious practice and their background. And then those would be an exception if we were basically speaking about the leader, or possibly the government is using force and using their political position and their political power to put this person in that place. And then what am I supposed to do? What is that supposed to mean? So here's the thing. Let's just say you are in Arabi country. Dictatorship is all that you have. They're all nothing but dictators. Okay? And you go into this masjid, and you know very well, and for a fact, that this person that is leading the prayer is right there. What we call it in Jordan and Palestine, we call it التسحيج, basically just supporting and just singing the song in the same rhetoric of basically just to support the leader and the king and whatever it is. And basically right there, this person in that position is not necessarily assigned to be the imam because of their qualification, but because of their relationship with this dictator. And I know for a fact that that person was assigned to be the imam not because they deserve that and they're qualified to be in that position, but because that person basically brings a religious appearance to the dictatorship that assigned him. Okay, in that situation, we have two options. We can have the option to not even pray behind this fajr, or we can have the option to pray behind this fajr. You're either going to pray or you're not going to pray. According to this hadith, إلا أن يقهره الله بسلطان يخاف سيفه وصوته. Unless this fajr imam, what's a fajr? Fajr is basically a person that is continuously going against the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a fajr. Okay, then this hadith is saying an exception unless the power of this dictator is overcoming
the mu'min from basically leading, then in that situation, if you fear to stand out and stand up and actually say this fajr should not be the person to lead because they lack the qualification, but then you would fear, if you were to say that you might be imprisoned, you might be interrogated, you might basically be pressured by the government, something similar to what was happening in Syria, for example, all of those, or even in Jordan, or in different countries, okay? And you would be afraid to actually stand up. So you have the option to leave in certain situations, but the Prophet ﷺ said in another hadith, صلوا خلف كل بر وفاجر. Pray behind every person that is pious or fajr. What does that mean? The unity in the ummah is more important and comes prior to sometimes having what is right to be done. What does that look like? So having everyone pray in this masjid, Salat al-Jumu'ah, for example, is more important than possibly standing up and then bringing in a disunity within this jama'ah. So pray behind this imam. Okay. But one thing I would say, there is this area that sometimes we really have to be very careful about. That sometimes there are certain positions that we have to have wisdom in. Is this giving an endorsement to this hakim or not? And we could see there are certain dictators that had really done, not, the word harm is not enough to describe the amount of terror that they had done to the society. Just like Bashar al-Assad. You hear about Sayyidina and what happened there, and you're just in awe. How can somebody actually approve, just get numbers of people and just put them in this machine that it's supposed to be kind of like, those machines that basically just bust cars and literally just shred them? Yes, they used to put human beings in those kind of things and just kill them while they're alive and just basically turn them into shredded pieces. That's it. Click the button and just boom, right before their eyes. And it wasn't 1, 2, 3, no, hundreds of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people every day are being put in mass graves. Children, women, and it's just, Ya Allah. So we have to be wise in what positions we carry before we act in this, what I had used previously, this type of darwasha, and just think that, I don't want to create a chaos and create all of these divisions. Well, there are certain situations that, no, it's creating unity to actually stand against these dictators. And sometimes we have to use that wisdom and not misinterpret the text. So that's just an aside. Okay. Maybe, I'm basically, I guess this would more be something probably directed more at men than women, because I don't expect, women to put themselves in that danger if it's a dictator, and possibly you standing out and possibly putting your ird in at risk or in jeopardy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not ask you to put yourself in this type of risk. They don't care if it's a dictator. They don't care about your ird. They don't care about any principles whatsoever. So alhamdulillah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not ask us to stand in those positions and risk our own ird and our own chastity. But I'm just, since I talked about this, if, your husband or probably somebody that had the ilm and had the hikmah and wanted to say this, I don't want our women to be those women that are filled with khunu' and filled with this type of misinterpreting the text in support of dictators or in support of that terror that these dictators are doing, because I see that a lot. Allahul musta'an. Okay, let's continue right there. So generally speaking, praying behind a fasiq is basically not something that is recommended. Okay. Unless of course unless this person basically got that position and you have no power. So what does that mean? Let's say you had this imam, he has a history of wrong misconduct. You had a personal relationship with this imam's wife, and she was always complaining about this man of being an abuser, of basically, behaving wrongly at home and etc. She complained to you, and you know that this imam is just not the best person. Should you then make and announce that publicly and start basically saying, hey, we're going to speak against this imam, and basically make it a public and starting to create this type of, let's say, revolution in the masjid? The answer is no. A personal thing, even, hey, if this imam's wife is having a dispute with her husband, probably gone violent, then the masjid to mean the public is not the area to solve such dispute. Then who's where to solve it? Maybe at court, maybe with another imam to basically solve the place, but not make the masjid be the field where this group is supporting the imam's wife and that group is basically supporting the imam, etc. And this isn't something that is a public matter. This is a personal matter. It's solved elsewhere. Okay. Now, the masjid here is supposed to be a place of unity. So therefore, if the imam was accused of misconduct or anything like that, this would be something that the HR, the public, basically the masjid board would basically, in a closed and keeping everything confidential, they'll basically decide to either leave this imam in that position or decide to lay him off. Okay. But if, let's say, some information was leaked, does that mean we would not stand to pray behind the imam? That we had leaked information of him having misconduct? No, you should pray behind him, even if there was leaked information of misconduct or some wrong behavior. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ said, "Sallu khalfa kulli barrin wa fajr." Pray behind every bar, every person that is pious, and every person that is fajr. And having the unity within the ummah is precedent over doing things basically as, let's call it, as in the most ideal way. The most ideal way, we'll fix it basically at other, let's call it, platforms, maybe maybe the school, the masjid board, maybe this, then we'll basically look at that, and that's the platform to basically decide. And the imamah in the masjid, the salah is not that platform. Salah is salah. He called for the salat al-jama'ah. Yeah, don't go running out in the hallway. because, yeah, I disagree with this Imam and I don't think he inspires me and I hate his voice and I can't stand him. No, 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 dear. You go and line up, because the Prophet ﷺ said, Sallu khalfa kulli barran wa fajr. Don't create your own jama'ah and create another jama'ah in the masjid. That's actually against Islam. Did I mention any name? Didn't mention any name. I'm just saying the Islamic ruling, the hikmah, in how we basically deal. This is basically fiqh. How we deal with those disputes that happen at the masjid and how we deal with these imams that basically went off track. Okay. Okay. So in situations when, of course, we're going to consider the masjid and the unity's interest in making this masjid basically a place that brings in the ummah together, then we'll deal with this imam on a different platform and decide whether we need to lay him off or keep him. Okay, let's see. The other thing is that a person that is ajiz, person that has a disability that's disabling them from doing ruku or sujood or even sitting down. Okay, if this imam has a disability, can't stand up, cannot sit probably, may not be capable of making the right sujood or even sitting down, etc., has some disability, then in that situation, we would not put this imam to lead in prayer. Okay, we wouldn't put him in the position to lead in prayer unless this imam is leading a whole group of people of disability. That's such a situation. That's a different situation. Okay, so in that situation, we would look at, it is not permissible of a person to lead the prayer that is basically not capable of doing and performing the whole prayer altogether. Why? Well, that's because this imam is supposed to be someone we were supposed to be taking as an example, even in their movement, etc. Okay, now here's one thing. Let's just say this imam is praying and all of a sudden, I guess they cracked their back right in the middle of the prayer. They couldn't do the proper ruku'. Okay, who knows? Cracked their back or probably, I guess, sprained their ankle while they were trying to get up or something. Something happened. Okay, they would continue. Okay, but then the two different opinions between this one, between scholars on this one. So let's just say that the imam had a sudden disability that was not there in the beginning of the prayer. And then let's just assume the imam sat down. Okay, the imam sat down because I guess he sprained his ankle, couldn't go up and do the sujood and in ruku' properly. So he sat down. Okay, let's just assume that it was sitting down. Do the people behind him that don't have that disability, do they pray sitting down or do they pray standing? Differences of opinions between scholars. Differences. The first opinion basically said, no, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا جُعِلَ الْإِمَامُ لِيُؤْتَمَّ بِهِ. Imam was there in order for the people to basically follow along with him. فَإِذَا رَكَعَ فَارْكَعُوا. If he makes ruku', then make ruku'. إِذَا رَفَعَ فَارْفَعُوا. And if he rises from ruku', then rise from ruku'. And if he prays sitting down, then pray sitting down. And in another hadith, فَصَلُّوا جُلُوسًا أَجْمَعُونَ. In this hadith, مُتَّفَقٌ عَلَيْهِ, this hadith is actually unanimously, or at least between Bukhari and Muslim, they both agreed that it is authentic. If he basically prays sitting down, then you're going to be praying sitting down. So if you have an authentic hadith, why are you then saying that there are differences of opinions, even though there's an authentic hadith? There's an authentic hadith, but there's a number of different interpretations. Okay, well, wait a minute. What does that mean? Okay, so there are two things. There is, pay attention to this one. This one's a little tricky, but I'll explain it. I promise you, it's going to be easy to understand. Okay, there is the قطعي الثبوت and ظني الثبوت. Okay, hold on, we're going to get there. And then there is another thing. Well, first of all, what is قطعي الثبوت? We're talking about something that is basically ثبوت to mean that it was evident. Okay, so we have something that is of strong evidence. We're speaking about that it is evident and there's no question about it. It's clear. And there is ظني, where basically we're in doubt of the resources and we're in doubt whether that is evident or not. Okay, that's two things. Number 3 and 4, there's, on the other hand, there is قطعي الدلالة. Okay, and there is ظني الدلالة. What is that? So there is that side in the text that's relating to whether it was proven, the text itself was proven or not. But then there's another thing, is that what it entails, the interpretation and what it entails. Is that basically something that is specific and clear, or is that something that can be, let's say, somewhat of not necessarily direct in its specification? Is it direct or indirect? So when you say قطعي الدلالة, we're actually, or dalala, we're actually talking about what is it inferring. Is the inference direct and straightforward, or is the inference basically indirect? So therefore, when you're looking at some of that, some interpretation can be within the context and some of it within the text. So in this situation, some scholars actually said that the context was actually for the non-obligatory prayer. So that the scholars, okay, that said that no, if the imam prays sitting down, then everyone else does not have the disability and they shouldn't be praying sitting down. That's the first opinion. The second opinion, they said no. The second opinion said, if the imam prays sitting down, then everyone else is to pray sitting down. And our evidence is that إِذَا صَلَّى جَالِسًا فَصَلُّوا جُلُوسًا. Here's our evidence. Pretty straightforward. The other ones, they responded and they said, well, it doesn't make sense, because is salat to pray while sitting down, that's basically for that imam and that reason to disqualify, or to basically not disqualify, but to qualify him to pray sitting down is not basically to be there for everyone else. Okay, is not there for everyone else, and certainly it is right there. So he said, ولو صلوا خلفه قياما أو صلى بعضهم قائما في تلك الحال صحت صلاتهم على الصحيح. And that's why he wanted to basically say, when he says على الصحيح, he said if some were to pray behind him standing, and some of them basically well, sitting at that, in that position, then in that situation, of course, their salah, according to some scholars, would basically be approved of. Okay, now just to keep that one in mind, okay, there are differences of opinions between scholars, and that's why he said خروجا من الخلاف. That's why he said when استخلف الإمام في تلك الحال من يصلي بهم قائما فهو أحسن. What does that mean? He said, and if, let's say, he had a sudden disability in prayer, sprained his ankle, but then decided, I'll bring someone else. Here it is. I'll basically go back and let the person that's behind me take over. He's saying that that would be a better option than sitting in praying sitting down, because then you'll stay away from the differences of opinions. Okay, and that would basically be the preferred option than actually sit down and confuse the people. Which fatwa should we sit down like him, or should we not sit down and basically pray and all of that? What should we do? And that's that area of differences of opinions. And certainly the people in the back, some are going to sit and some are going to stand, and then of course they're going to be confused and all of that. To stay away from the differences of opinions, he basically decided, I'll just sit down and let the person that's behind me take over, because of this sudden the sudden disability that popped up. Okay, what about a person that has a different kind of a disability? Like what? A different kind of a disability, like a person that might have something that we can't really see that is impairing them from having continuous wudu. Like what? So we're continuous wudu. Let's say they had incontinence, okay? Or they had maybe a problem with gas. They're continuously passing gas, okay? Or probably just different disabilities right there. We don't really know about that, okay? I mean, we wouldn't necessarily know this imam has incontinence or not. Yeah, we mean, all we know is that he's diabetic or probably has kidney issues, but we wouldn't really know whether he has a problem with urine leakage. We don't know. And in that situation, the imam himself should know that if he has this problem where he cannot maintain his wudu for long, or he doesn't have the ability to control it, then in that situation, he should know that he should not be leading the prayer. He should not be the imam. And therefore, his prayer, is it invalid? His prayer is not invalid, because he's part of Ashab al-Adhar. He could make wudu for every salah, and according to the Maliki, if what invalidates the prayer is basically that same invalidation, that he doesn't have to make wudu for every salah. That's a different story, okay? Different discussion. But what about the leading prayer? For leading prayer, we would say, don't lead the prayer. We would say, don't lead the prayer, just to make sure that everyone's prayer is also going to be valid. So your prayer as an individual is valid, but leading the prayer on the people is basically that place of differences of opinions. Group A said everyone's prayer is invalid. Group B basically said that no, the prayer is not invalid, but it's not the most ideal. Wallahu a'lam is that the prayer itself is valid for the people in the back, but it's not the most ideal. Okay? So in that situation, his own prayer was permissible because of a darura, because of a necessity. But your imama is not a darura. You leading the prayer is not a necessity. So therefore, you got to put forward the people that are capable of actually giving the best performance. Okay, think of it as the best performance. Your situation is basically disabling you from giving the best performance. So your performance is basically not going to be the most ideal. So therefore, if you know you have this situation, then don't stand to be the imam. Okay. And this is extremely important. Just keep in mind, if someone doesn't want to be the imam, don't corner them to question, well, why not? And etc. Sometimes some certain things are personal the person doesn't want to disclose that they have incontinence or they're basically leaking urine or something like that. I mean, just give people certain spaces. If they don't want to, they don't feel comfortable, just respect people's privacies and don't necessarily try to investigate, well, why not? And sometimes they may give you a reason that is not really the real reason and tell you, I'm shy, even though that's actually not really the reason. Okay, so sometimes they might actually give what is called tawriya. What is tawriya? Tawriya is not giving you the real reason and just hiding behind a different reason. Okay, hiding behind a different reason. So they'll just give you a reason. It's not, I mean, completely lying, but it's choosing to not disclose all the information. Okay, let's see. So what if a person, okay, we would know that this person is leading, okay? But then this imam, we discovered that we could see the najasa right on their clothes. He was playing with the cat and he didn't know that the cat urinated on his clothes. Cat's urine is najis. Yes, the cat's urine is najis. He didn't know that the najasa was there. But we saw it. We didn't want to embarrass him, but we saw it. But so what happens then? So should we stand behind this imam or what should we do? Okay. So one, the people in the back, their prayer is right. Okay. But that imam's prayer is invalid. Then he would have to redo his prayer. Okay, but the people in the back. Let's say the Prophet ﷺ, إذا صلى الجنوب بالقوم أعاد صلاته. The Prophet ﷺ said, if a junub would pray as an imam, leading people, and then he discovered basically that he was in a state of janaba and that he didn't take a shower yet. State in janaba is, remember, post-sexual, the post-sexual najasa, impurity, before taking a shower, basically. Okay, that the Prophet ﷺ said that the person would redo his prayer, but تمت للقوم صلاتهم, but the people, their salah is basically valid. Okay, so you right here, he said basically the reference for that hadith. Let's see, Ibn Taymiyyah said, and upon that, the action of al-Khulafa al-Rashidin, basically until 40-year hijrah, that they would pray on people, and then if they were to later discover that the person had janaba, then they would, that is the person that prayed with that janaba, they would be the ones to redo their prayer, but they would not order the people to redo their prayer. And if the imam or the ma'moom knew about that impurity, then everyone's prayer basically is invalid. So what does that mean? They saw that impurity on that person. And by the way, this piece of it right there, that if they had known about it, that everyone's prayer is invalid, differences of opinions on that one, by the way. This piece of it, is all of their prayer, let's say he was praying and then there comes a cat, urinates on, I don't know, the imam's clothes while he was praying, for example. I know it's probably a hard way to, okay. And then this imam, everyone else in the back was capable of seeing it, but he wasn't capable of seeing it because he was, I guess, focused on his recitation. But everyone in the back was capable of seeing it. They just didn't say anything and just continued their prayer. So the first opinion, all of their salah is invalid because they were supposed to, I guess, say something somehow. Okay. Clapping for women and subhanallah for the man. But then they said subhanallah, but he still didn't understand it. He was thinking, subhanallah, I didn't make a mistake in the qira'ah. He didn't even know what they were trying to basically bring to his attention. Okay. So according to opinion one, is that, well, someone was supposed to probably stand up and bring it to his attention that this cat invalidated his tahara right there. Okay, that's opinion number one. Opinion number two, that no, it's irrelevant. The imam's tahara, the imam's salah is not necessarily connected to the people's salah. What does that mean? According to some scholars, without going into details with who and which madhab, okay, the first madhab basically considers that if the imam's prayer gets invalid, then the ma'mumin's prayer gets invalid as well. All of it. The second opinion, if the imam's valid gets invalid, well, that's his prayer that got invalid, not everyone else's. Why not? Like I said, because the imam, جُعِلَ الْإِمَامُ لِيُؤْتَمَّ بِهِ, to lead the prayer, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the prayer on behalf of everyone else. That's that opinion. Okay? And let's look at the other one. لا تصح إمامة الأمي, said the imama of a person that is what? Illiterate? Are we talking about an illiterate person? I wonder how he translated it. Hold on, let's see. So right there, he wanted to say, if one is in a state of janaba, leads the people to prayer, he's to perform his prayer again. Talked about this one. Ibn Taymiyyah, which is basically what I did just right there. Where was it? Oh dear. Where was it? It was here. Okay, here we go. This is the quote of Ibn Taymiyyah. You got it right there. Well, let's continue right there. I want to see how he translates ummi, illiterate person. Okay. Oh, okay. Then he explained what he means by illiterate. He said, who does not memorize the Surah Al-Fatiha properly, or memorizes it but recites it improperly, such as making grammatical mistakes or changing the meaning. These mistakes include saying, upon whom I have bestowed favor. Okay. So, right. So I guess he explained the illiterate piece of it. Okay. So when you're looking at reciting Al-Fatiha, you'll be so surprised, by the way, within our society, I used to teach at Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa for a couple of years. And while I was teaching in Masjid Al-Aqsa, I got to see what I never had thought existed within the Muslim Ummah, and even in an Arabi society, in a place like Palestine. There were many people that couldn't even read the Fatiha. The Fatiha, believe it or not, didn't even know the ABCs of Ahkam al-Tahara. Didn't even know any of those rulings. Yes, that existed. I know during our times, maybe we think that the education has gotten better, but not necessarily. Some of that education is education in probably learning how to read and write and not learning how to understand Islam. So yes, this does actually exist. So for a person that cannot read the Fatiha properly, instead of saying an'amta alayhim, probably said an'amtu alayhim. Or maybe instead of reading iyyaka na'budu, iyyaki na'budu, or just changing the fatha dhamma, or probably not knowing how to articulate the letters, maybe reading the ra into a gha, maybe, or the da into a da. So in that situation, that would be an ummi. That's the definition of illiterate. So it doesn't mean illiterate not to basically have a college degree or probably school or high school diploma. Okay, let's see. The other thing is that leading on certain people that basically they would hate that he would lead them in. The Prophet ﷺ said, ثلاثة لا تجاوز صلاتهم آذانهم. Sorry. العبد الآبق حتى يرجع، امرأة باتت وزوجها عليها ساخط، وإمام قوم وهم له كارهون. Okay, let's see. The Prophet ﷺ had said, 3, their salah does not go beyond their ears. The runaway slave until he would come back. And a woman that sleeps and her husband is angry at her. And an imam who leads the people and the people hate and detest his leadership. They don't want him to be the imam. Then in that situation, that's basically a person that their prayer would not go beyond their ears. In other words, their prayer is not blessed. Okay, let's see this one. Another one, the Prophet ﷺ said, okay, ثلاثة لا تجاوز صلاتهم آذانهم رجل أما قوما وهم له كارهون ورجل لا يأتي الصلاة إلا دبارا ورجل اعتبد محررا. And he said, 3, their salah would not go beyond their ears. A man who leads the prayer and the people are hating his leadership or his imam. And a man that only comes to salah at the very end. And a man that enslaved a person that is free. So let's see this one. How did he translate it, right? Let's see how he translated it. A person who leads prayer while they are dissatisfied with him. I like the word dissatisfied because that would probably be better than not liking. Okay, let's see. A man who comes to prayer too late after it's finished, that is. Okay, a man who takes into slavery an emancipated male or female slave. Basically enslave someone that is free. Okay. What if the reason why they're hating this person, okay, is of something that is not fair? Maybe because it's a Somali masjid, for example, okay? But they're not wanting this person because, let's just say this person is Arab. They're like, nah, we don't want Arab. Okay, then in that situation, what should we do? You know, it was based on a racist thing. Or maybe because Arabi masjid, they didn't want that person because he was African. Okay, so in that situation, this is not supposed to be something that we should endorse. We shouldn't be endorsing such racism. We shouldn't be endorsing such racism. So in that situation, we shouldn't be saying, okay, well, we hate him now. Okay, change this person because he's Arab or because he's African or because he's, I don't know what race, whatever it is. So for racist reasons, we shouldn't be approving it. And we should not allow that to basically find a way to get its application. We have to rethink in how we let people use their jahiliyyah to basically continue a certain wrong behavior or a certain wrong idea. We have to stand against it. So that does not apply. Okay. But if we're speaking about someone basically that they don't like him, maybe his voice doesn't sound the best, for example, then in that situation, that's a good valid reason. Sorry, but they don't actually like your voice. Can we do like a poll type of thing? Certainly we can do a poll to see if, yes, how many people like this imam, how many people don't like this imam, and when should we put him to lead, etc., and create something like that in order to determine, is this person preferred or whose preference do they really take in consideration? Maybe perhaps even do a poll when hiring an imam. Maybe let the interview be public and not only to the board of the masjid, be a public interview. And then we would do a poll. The masjid would basically do a poll to determine who's going to be hired as an imam. Maybe that's another thing that we should be taking in consideration. To do a poll. Why? Because al-imama is not just an issue of qualification. Part of that qualification is actually acceptance. To actually do, this type of voting. Okay. But if the imam is basically, just got nothing wrong with him, he's basically, it's it's just an issue of racism, for example, to put in that dispute, okay, and bring in, I guess, what is ideal. Sometimes we can't necessarily consider what is ideal, and what is ideal in this situation is to make sure that the ummah is still united on the right thing. So although, yes, we disagree with racism, but putting in the unity as a priority is what is most ideal. Yes, we disagree and do not approve this racism of probably it's a Arabi masjid, but because this person is possibly maybe African, and that's why they don't want him to lead, etc., thinking that he's less qualified, even though he's a lot more qualified than everyone else, but because of the racism that exists within our society. Okay, so what should we do then? We should weigh the situation. We should weigh the situation and not necessarily consider, the wrong ideal. What is ideal is to make sure that there is a unity within the masjid. Okay, and certainly those that would disapprove, they would definitely be held accountable for hiding on this imam for a racist reason. Okay, but at the end, we have to basically consider staying away from the different disputes and consider that bring in the unity as our most important, I guess, priority. Okay, so this is it, inshallah. There's always a lot more to say. Let's see. And who's capable of doing salah right there? Duties of the imam. So that's what we're going to do, inshallah, the day after tomorrow. But hopefully we'll be going faster. But today was a sensitive topic. So kind of needed some awareness about some things. So that's why we kind of touched on some issues, because this is a very sensitive issue that's bringing a lot of confusion, disunity, and certainly bring in a lot of troubles and drama within the masjid. So that's why I needed to comment on it. I'm never going to be the imam, of course. All right, but bringing awareness within the society is basically keeping the ummah intact, keeping the ummah unified. So awareness, at least, is more important than the position itself. All right. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. No one has a question? That's okay. What I'll do, I will, Rishma, you had something to say, dear.